What if I told you one of the most talked about quarterback draft picks in Cleveland might already be on the way out, just 1 year after being selected? Sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly the situation surrounding Dillon Gabriel right now. Not long ago, the Cleveland Browns used a valuable third-round pick to bring him into the organization, believing he could develop into a legitimate option under center. The plan seemed simple. Let him learn the system, grow behind veteran quarterbacks, and maybe eventually become part of the franchise's long-term future. But the NFL moves fast, sometimes brutally fast. In just a single season, the entire conversation around Gabriel has flipped. The excitement that once surrounded his arrival has faded, and new rumors suggest the Browns could already be considering moving on. Even more surprising, some insiders believe he might only bring back a late-round pick if Cleveland decides to trade him. So what actually happened behind the scenes? Why did the momentum disappear so quickly? And how does the rising buzz around Shedeur Sanders change everything for the Browns' quarterback room? Because when you dig deeper into this situation, the story becomes far more intense than anyone expected. When the Cleveland Browns selected Dillon Gabriel in the third round of the draft, the reaction around the fan base was immediate, and it was mixed. Some people believed the move made sense. A third-round quarterback is usually viewed as a developmental project, someone who can sit, learn the system, and slowly grow into a potential contributor down the line. But others were far less convinced. In fact, a noticeable portion of the fan base questioned the decision almost instantly. The debate wasn't necessarily about Gabriel's talent. At the college level, he had shown plenty of production and experience. He had put up strong numbers, demonstrated leadership, and displayed the kind of competitive mindset that coaches often look for when evaluating quarterbacks. On paper, he looked like the type of player who could eventually become a solid NFL contributor with the right development. But the concern many people had was about timing and opportunity. When the Browns made that pick, some analysts felt there were other players on the board who might have made a more immediate impact. The team had several areas of the roster that still needed improvement, and critics argued that using a valuable top 100 pick on a quarterback project might not have been the best allocation of resources. That debate didn't go away after the draft either. It followed Gabriel throughout his first season with the team. Still, the Browns clearly had a plan. The organization wasn't expecting Gabriel to walk in and become a star overnight. The strategy was much more patient. They believed he could develop behind the scenes while learning the offense, adjusting to the speed of the NFL, and building chemistry with teammates. Quarterbacks drafted in the middle rounds often follow that exact path. Some sit for a year or two before ever seeing meaningful playing time, using that period to refine their mechanics and absorb the playbook. In theory, it was a completely reasonable approach. But the NFL rarely follows neat development timelines. Injuries, roster changes, and unexpected circumstances can force young players into action much sooner than planned. And when that happens, the spotlight arrives instantly. That's exactly what happened in Cleveland. Instead of spending an entire season quietly learning from the sidelines, Dillon Gabriel eventually found himself stepping onto the field much earlier than expected. What was supposed to be a gradual development process suddenly turned into a real evaluation period, with coaches, fans, and analysts all watching closely to see whether he could handle the moment. And that's where the entire narrative surrounding Gabriel began to change. Because once a young quarterback gets real opportunities in the NFL, the expectations shift immediately. The league is constantly searching for signs of potential stars, and when those flashes don't appear right away, patience can disappear just as quickly. And unfortunately for Gabriel, the opportunities he received would end up creating more questions than answers. Here, where the Dillon Gabriel story really starts to take a turn, because this wasn't a situation where a rookie quarterback spent the entire season sitting quietly on the bench learning behind veterans. Gabriel actually got real opportunities to step onto the field. In total, he started 6 games during the season. For a rookie quarterback, that's a significant opportunity to prove yourself in the NFL. When young quarterbacks get that kind of playing time, coaches evaluate everything. It's not just about passing yards or touchdowns. They study how the quarterback handles the huddle, how quickly he processes defensive coverages, how he reacts when the pocket collapses, and how teammates respond to his leadership. Those moments reveal whether a player might eventually grow into a true starting quarterback. Those 6 games were supposed to be the beginning of Gabriel's development story in Cleveland. The Browns were hopping to see flashes, moments that would hint at long-term potential. Maybe a big throw in a tight situation. Maybe a calm drive late in the game. Maybe the type of leadership that makes teammates believe in you. But instead of building momentum, the performances left the coaching staff with uncertainty. That doesn't mean Gabriel showed no ability. In fact, there were moments where his talent was visible. His college experience helped him stay composed at times, and he showed flashes of the decision-making that made him attractive during the draft process. But the problem was consistency. In the NFL, flashes aren't always enough. Teams are looking for signs that a quarterback can eventually control the offense and lead a team week after week. And when those signs aren't clearly visible, the front office begins to ask difficult questions. Another factor that complicated the situation was the environment around him. The Browns' offense dealt with injuries throughout the season, and the offensive line wasn't always able to provide stable protection. For any young quarterback, that kind of environment can make development extremely challenging. Even veteran quarterbacks struggle when the offense around them isn't functioning smoothly. Some analysts have pointed out that Gabriel may not have been placed in the easiest situation to succeed. Young quarterbacks often need time to build chemistry with receivers and fully understand the timing of the offense. Without that stability, it becomes harder to show your full potential. But here's the harsh reality of the NFL. Teams rarely have the luxury of waiting years to see if things eventually click. The league moves fast. Coaches and front offices are constantly evaluating every position on the roster. And if uncertainty starts to grow around a quarterback, the organization quickly begins exploring other options. And in Cleveland, that evaluation process has already begun to shift the conversation around Gabriel in a completely different direction. Once uncertainty begins surrounding a young quarterback, the conversation inside an NFL building can change quickly. And that appears to be exactly what's happening with Dillon Gabriel in Cleveland. Reports and discussions around the Browns suggest that while the team still acknowledges his potential, he may no longer be viewed as a serious contender for the starting quarterback role moving forward. That's a major shift in perception. Remember, this is a player who was drafted in the top 100 just a year ago. Third-round selections are not throwaway picks in the NFL. Teams expect those players to develop into meaningful contributors. Sometimes that means becoming a starter. Other times it means becoming a reliable backup who can step in when needed. But either way, teams typically expect to see clear progress early in a player's career. In Gabriel's case, the progress hasn't convinced the organization that he should be part of the long-term quarterback solution, at least not right now. Instead, the most realistic scenario if he remains on the roster may be as a developmental backup. That role still holds value in the NFL. Teams rely heavily on depth at the quarterback position because injuries can completely reshape a season overnight. But it's a very different expectation than what many people imagined when Cleveland originally made the pick. And this is where the trade conversations begin to enter the picture. Around the league, young quarterbacks on rookie contracts always attract some level of interest. They provide affordable depth and potential upside, which makes them appealing to teams looking to strengthen their quarterback rooms. If the Browns decide that Gabriel no longer fits into their long-term plans, moving him for a late-round draft pick could become a realistic option. From a front office perspective, that type of move can make sense. Even recovering a small amount of draft capital allows the team to reinvest in other areas of the roster. It also opens up a valuable roster spot, which can be critical during an offseason when teams are constantly adjusting their depth charts. But the decision isn't as simple as it might appear on the surface. Moving on from a recent draft pick always raises questions about the original evaluation process. Fans and analysts inevitably start asking whether the scouting department misjudged the player or whether the situation simply didn't unfold the way the team expected. These types of decisions are heavily scrutinized, especially when the player involved was selected so recently. And in Cleveland's case, the quarterback situation is already one of the most closely watched storylines surrounding the franchise. Because while the Browns are evaluating Gabriel's future, there is another name inside the organization that continues to draw more and more attention, and that growing momentum could end up shaping the entire direction of the quarterback room. While the Browns continue evaluating Dillon Gabriel's future, another storyline has quietly been gaining momentum inside Cleveland, and it revolves around Shedeur Sanders. Over the past several months, Sanders has become one of the most talked about names connected to the future of the franchise. The excitement around him isn't just coming from fans or media speculation. It's starting to feel like the entire atmosphere around the quarterback room is shifting in his direction. And in the NFL, momentum like that can change everything. Every offseason, teams conduct brutally honest evaluations of their quarterback position. Coaches study film, analyze practice performances, and look closely at how each quarterback commands the offense. Leadership, confidence, and chemistry with teammates all play a massive role in those evaluations. When a quarterback begins to show the kind of presence that suggests he could lead the team, it doesn't go unnoticed. Many observers believe that's exactly what is beginning to happen with Sanders. When a young quarterback starts capturing the imagination of the organization, it naturally shifts the focus of the entire team. Coaches begin thinking about how the offense could be built around that player's strengths. Teammates start developing timing and chemistry during practice. Fans begin picturing what the future might look like if that quarterback continues to develop. And once that excitement begins building, every other quarterback on the roster gets evaluated through a different lens. For Dillon Gabriel, this creates a very difficult situation. When he first arrived in Cleveland, the expectation was that he would have time to develop without enormous pressure. Third-round quarterbacks usually aren't expected to immediately compete for control of the offense. Instead, they're given time to learn the system and adjust to the speed of the professional game. But when another young quarterback begins to generate real excitement, patience can disappear quickly. Inside NFL locker rooms, players are extremely aware of these shifts in energy. It shows up in practice intensity, in the way coaches structure drills, and even in the conversations happening around the building. Quarterbacks are especially sensitive to these dynamics because their position sits at the center of everything an offense does. When one player starts gaining momentum, the competition becomes sharper for everyone else. For the Browns, this creates a complicated situation. The franchise has spent years searching for stability at quarterback. Different players have cycled through the position, each bringing new hope that the long-term answer might finally be found. That history makes the current evaluation process even more important. If Cleveland truly believes that Sanders could eventually become the leader of the offense, the roster around him will begin to adjust accordingly. And when that happens, difficult decisions about the rest of the quarterback room inevitably follow. Once momentum begins shifting toward one quarterback, the rest of the depth chart inevitably comes under heavier scrutiny. That's exactly the situation the Cleveland Browns now face with Dillon Gabriel. Even though the organization still recognizes that he has potential, The bigger question becomes whether there is enough space on the roster for his continued development, while the team focuses on other priorities. NFL teams rarely carry large quarterback rooms during the regular season. Most franchises structure the position with a clear hierarchy: a starting quarterback, a trusted backup who can step in if needed, and sometimes one developmental player who is still learning the system. Because the position is so important, every spot has to serve a specific purpose. If Cleveland believes they already have that structure in place, Gabriel could quickly become the odd man out. Part of the challenge comes from how different quarterbacks fit into a coaching system. Every offensive coordinator has a certain type of quarterback they prefer. Some value mobility and improvisation, while others prioritize pocket presence and precise timing in the passing game. When a new coaching philosophy begins to shape the offense, players who don't perfectly fit that vision sometimes struggle to secure long-term roles. Some analysts have suggested that Gabriel's skill set may not align perfectly with the direction Cleveland's offense is heading. That doesn't necessarily mean he lacks ability. It simply means the coaching staff might believe other quarterbacks are better suited for the system they want to run moving forward. Another factor is how crowded the quarterback room could become during the offseason. The Browns still have multiple options on the table when it comes to adding talent at the position. They could sign a veteran quarterback in free agency, explore potential trades, or even draft another developmental prospect later in the draft. If any of those moves happen, the competition inside the quarterback room could become intense very quickly. When that kind of competition develops, front offices start evaluating every roster spot carefully. Quarterback depth is valuable, but there is also a limit to how many players a team can realistically keep at the position. If Cleveland decides to add another quarterback, someone may have to move in order to create space. And from a roster management perspective, Gabriel could be the easiest player to move. Because he is still young and on a rookie contract, another team might be willing to trade a late-round pick for the opportunity to develop him in their own system. That kind of move would allow the Browns to recover some draft value while opening a roster spot for a player who better fits their evolving plans. But even if that scenario plays out, it doesn't necessarily mean Gabriel's story in the NFL would be over. In fact, history suggests the opposite might be true. Even though the situation in Cleveland appears uncertain, it's important to understand something about the NFL. Quarterback careers rarely follow a straight line. Many players struggle early in their careers, only to find success later when they land in a different system or with a different coaching staff. That possibility is one of the main reasons teams around the league remain interested in young quarterbacks who still have developmental upside. And Dillon Gabriel could easily fall into that category. One of the biggest advantages he has is his rookie contract. Young quarterbacks on affordable deals are extremely valuable to NFL teams because they provide depth without consuming large amounts of salary cap space. For teams that are uncertain about their quarterback depth chart, bringing in a young player with experience can be a low-risk move that potentially offers long-term upside. From another team's perspective, Gabriel could represent an opportunity rather than a disappointment. Coaches across the league often believe that with the right environment, certain players can unlock abilities that weren't fully visible in their previous situation. A different offensive system, a stronger supporting cast, or simply more time to develop can dramatically change a quarterback's trajectory. In fact, the NFL has seen plenty of examples where players struggled early in one organization before eventually finding their footing somewhere else. Because of that, a trade involving Gabriel might not be viewed as giving up on a player. It could simply be giving him a fresh start. Teams that are rebuilding or looking for developmental quarterbacks may see potential in his college production and the flashes he showed during his limited NFL playing time. Even if he never becomes a full-time starter, Quarterbacks who can serve as reliable backups and step into games when needed are incredibly valuable in today's league. Injuries happen constantly in the NFL, and teams are always searching for depth at the most important position on the field. That's why situations like Gabriel's often attract quiet interest from other organizations. Front offices and scouts are constantly studying players who may be available through trades or roster moves. If Cleveland signals that Gabriel could be moved, there is a good chance at least a few teams would explore whether he might fit better within their own offensive system. At the same time, Cleveland has to focus on its own priorities. The Browns have spent years trying to find long-term stability at quarterback. Different strategies have come and gone, different players have been given opportunities, and the organization is still searching for the solution that can lead the team into the future. Every decision surrounding the quarterback room now carries enormous importance, which means the upcoming offseason could ultimately determine not only Dillon Gabriel's future, but the entire direction of the Browns franchise. When a team drafts a quarterback in the third round, that decision is rarely made lightly. Months of scouting, film study, interviews, and internal debate usually go into selecting a player at that spot in the draft. The Cleveland Browns didn't choose Dillon Gabriel by accident. At the time, the organization clearly believed there was enough potential in his skill set to justify investing valuable draft capital. But the NFL is a league driven by results, and sometimes those evaluations don't unfold the way teams originally expect. Front offices constantly walk a delicate line between patience and adaptation. On one hand, they don't want to give up on a young player too quickly. Development takes time, especially at the quarterback position where the learning curve is incredibly steep. On the other hand, teams also can't afford to wait indefinitely if they believe the roster needs to move in a different direction. That balance is exactly what the Browns' leadership is trying to figure out right now. Reports around the organization suggest that Cleveland still respects Gabriel's work ethic and understands he has developmental value. Those internal evaluations matter more than fans often realize. Coaches pay close attention to how quarterbacks prepare during the week, how they respond to coaching, and how they handle adversity after difficult performances. Those traits can influence how long a team remains invested in a player. However, the Browns are also entering an offseason where urgency is beginning to grow. The franchise wants stability at the quarterback position, something that has been difficult to maintain over the past several years. Fans want to see a clear direction. Ownership wants to see progress. And the front office knows that finding the right quarterback solution is the key to building a competitive team for the future. Because of that urgency, every option is being evaluated carefully. Should Cleveland keep Gabriel as a developmental quarterback and continue investing time into his growth? Or would it be smarter to explore the trade market while his value still exists and use that roster spot to strengthen another area of the team? These are the kinds of questions that front offices across the league deal with constantly. The business side of football also plays a role in these decisions. Rookie contracts are extremely valuable because they allow teams to maintain depth at important positions without consuming large portions of the salary cap. Even if Gabriel is not currently viewed as a future starter in Cleveland, another team might look at his college success, physical tools, and limited NFL experience and see a player worth developing. If the Browns decide to move him, the most realistic return would likely be a late-round draft pick. That may not sound significant on the surface, but late-round selections still provide opportunities to add depth and uncover hidden talent. And in a league where every roster decision can shape the future of a franchise, even small moves can carry major consequences. At this point, the situation surrounding Dillon Gabriel has become about much more than just one player. What's happening in Cleveland right now represents a larger turning point for the franchise. Quarterback decisions don't exist in isolation in the NFL. Once a team starts leaning toward a particular direction at that position, everything else around the roster begins to shift as well. And that's exactly where the Browns find themselves heading into this offseason. Think about the timing of all this. The NFL offseason is one of the most active periods in the league. Free agency opens the door for veteran quarterbacks to change teams. The upcoming draft introduces an entirely new group of prospects that teams can evaluate and develop. At the same time, front offices across the league are constantly monitoring trade possibilities, looking for players who might fit better in a different system. In other words, the quarterback market is always moving. For Cleveland, that means every decision they make during this period could shape the next several seasons. If the organization believes it has found the future of the franchise in Shedeur Sanders, then the logical step will be to start building the offense around him. That includes adjusting the quarterback room, determining who fits the long-term plan, and making difficult choices about players who may no longer align with that vision. And that's where Dillon Gabriel's situation becomes complicated. He still has the opportunity to continue developing, but the environment around him is changing rapidly. When another quarterback begins capturing the attention of the organization, the margin for error becomes much smaller for everyone else competing in the room. Every practice rep, every preseason snap, and every roster evaluation suddenly carries more weight. In the NFL, those moments can determine whether a player secures a long-term role or finds himself looking for opportunities elsewhere. But there's another side to this story that makes it so intriguing. Football careers are rarely predictable. Many quarterbacks who struggled early in their careers eventually found success after changing teams or landing in a system that better suited their abilities. Sometimes all it takes is the right coaching staff, the right offensive scheme, or simply more time for a player's potential to fully develop. So even if Cleveland ultimately decides to move on from Gabriel, that wouldn't necessarily mean the end of his NFL journey. It could simply mark the beginning of a new chapter somewhere else in the league. Meanwhile, the Browns must stay focused on their ultimate goal, finding stability at the most important position in football. And with the growing buzz surrounding Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback room in Cleveland may soon be heading toward one of its most important decisions in years. So now the Browns are standing at a crossroads, and the next decision they make could shape the future of the entire franchise. Dillon Gabriel entered Cleveland as a promising third-round draft pick, a quarterback the organization believed could quietly develop into something valuable. But the NFL doesn't always give players the time teams originally planned for. One season, a handful of starts, and the entire narrative around him has already shifted. At the same time, the rising excitement around Shedeur Sanders is changing the energy inside the building. When a team begins to believe it may have found its future leader, every other decision around the quarterback room starts to revolve around that belief. That leaves Gabriel in a difficult position. The Browns must decide whether he still fits into their long-term plan, or whether the smarter move is to give him a fresh opportunity somewhere else in the league. Either way, one thing is clear. Cleveland's quarterback situation is heading toward a major turning point, and the next move could change everything for the franchise moving forward.